Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 mini-series with the Seattle Mariners. And we have gotten to the start of free agency here in the 25 to 26 offseason. And we've actually got a decent amount of money to spend after some difficult decisions, most notably trading away our longtime starting shortstop, J.P. Crawford. But before we get into what we plan on doing this off season, a couple of quick programming notes. First of all, if you're watching, thank you. If you're new to the channel and you haven't subscribed, would sincerely appreciate that. We've built up a fun community here, and I'm really looking forward to a long play that will be upcoming where I'll be getting into much more detail around my thought process of building, or in the case of any franchise that I happen to play for the long play, rebuilding a team and kind of balancing short-term and long-term considerations and hopefully building up a franchise over a period of decades in game time. So that will start hopefully sometime in this month of April. I'm kind of waiting for two things at this point. One is for one more patch to the game. There's still a few things that are a little out of balance in my view. I could certainly go into the settings and try to address some of those things, but I'm hoping that another patch will clean up some of those little inconsistencies and imbalances that bother me, even though they might not bother other people. And then the second thing I'm waiting for, in addition to the patch, is hopefully the release of the online manual for OOTP 25. They said it's coming. It's not out there as of the last time I have checked earlier today. I know a lot of people don't really refer to the manuals. I, being old school, remember the days when games like this would have 120, 150, 200 page manuals, which I would devour to kind of learn all the ins and outs of the game. All that stuff is online now, but I think it's important for me to read through the manual before I start the long play, if at all possible, simply because I make assumptions based on previous versions of the game. I make assumptions perhaps based on things that viewers have shared with me in the comments or that I picked up on the OOTP message boards. And the best way to ensure that the information I'm sharing and the decisions I'm making are based on facts rather than anything else is to read through that manual and make sure I understand from the developers' mouths, or more accurately, their typing fingers, exactly what different things mean and exactly what different things do. So hopefully in the next couple of weeks we'll get that stuff and we'll be able to get a long play. Until then, though, we're going to keep this Seattle Mariners mini-series going. The final programming note is that this is going to be the last episode for a couple of days. I've been putting out a relatively torrid pace of videos in this Seattle mini-series, a previous Yankees mini-series, and a few tutorial videos in the close to a month since OOTP 25 came out. So there's plenty of previous videos if you've missed any to go back and watch, and would appreciate if you do that. But I have to travel for work for the rest of this week. It's Tuesday evening as I'm doing this video. I will be posting this video long before the crack of dawn Wednesday morning before I get to the airport for an insanely early flight. And I will be heading to Texas for the rest of the week, which I am looking forward to, but I won't be back until late Friday, so probably will not be a new video until sometime on Saturday, so appreciate the patience of you who are anxiously awaiting the next video in this series. It's been a while since I've been to Dallas, and I was hoping to possibly catch a game at Globe Life Field. Looks like the final game of a homestand is tomorrow night against the A's, who are one of the 5 teams that I'm still considering for my long play. I had gone to the ballpark in Arlington many years ago when it was a relatively new field, and one of the kind of new generation of fields following Camden Yards in Baltimore that had irregular dimensions and a little more charm than the cookie cutter stadiums I kind of grew up with AstroTurf and very consistent dimensions in the 70s and 80s. I always liked that park. I know they eventually moved on from it for something with a retractable roof, which makes sense given the summers in Texas. So I was hoping that I might be able to check out a game while I was there. Unfortunately, the timing's just not going to work. Have a work dinner commitment tomorrow evening that will keep me from the game. And then I also have obligations on Thursday night, but I'm pretty sure I looked, and I think they are on to Houston anyways on Thursday. So won't be able to catch a game in another stadium in my quest to see as many stadiums as possible, unfortunately, but still hoping to have a good, productive, safe business trip. And as I noted, I'll be back likely on Saturday with the next episode. And with those pleasantries and formalities and updates out of the way, it's time to start moving forward in this episode. And as we think about what Seattle needs after a very disappointing 81 season, we need some help offensively. We were number 1 in the American League with our pitching staff in runs allowed, but we were 12th in runs scored. We got a little bit unlucky. We were 4 games below Pythagorean expectations, but you don't play the games with the Pythagorean formula. You play them on a computer screen, and we were a 500 team on the computer screen. So looking for some help in our offense is what I'm going to focus on this offseason. Unfortunately, there's no huge bats available. If you watch previous episodes and last offseason, you'll know that we went after and signed both Gleyber Torres and Juan Soto last offseason, part of the reason why we had relatively lofty expectations after an 88-win playoff season in 2024 that were not met. There's really no bats like those guys available this year, so my hope is that they just have better sophomore seasons in Seattle than their rookie seasons. We're in the process of trying to hire a new manager who may have a little better relationship with some of the star players on our team, which hopefully will help. But we've got a 3-pronged approach to free agency this year. There are some pitchers that we're really interested in out there. Thank Jackhammer Possessor and Darkosis for some thoughts on some of the pitchers and players that are available. But for the near term, we're going to really focus on the everyday players who are available. And I mentioned a 3-pronged approach. The first prong is a relatively cheap contract to someone who we think could be an interesting right-handed bat for us. Hunter Renfroe was looking for $2 million in a 1-year contract. We've offered actually less to him, an average of $1.6 million a year over 3 years with some team options. He's a competent defensive outfielder at this point, but he is a very productive bat against left-handed pitching. We really envision him just as a guy who's only going to be starting 30, 40, maybe 45, 50 tops games against left-handed pitching over the course of the season, and then being a threat off our bench and someone who can fill in when the players who normally play against right-handed starters need a day off. But for the money that we'd be paying him, I think he could be a very productive hitter for us with that profile. So that is the cheap option. We've also made a trade offer for a interesting player who I think could pair very well with Mr. Renfroe in the outfield. I'll talk about that if and when the team that we've made the offer to responds to us. And then the last prong is going to be trying to make a big free agent acquisition. And we are going to go with, at least according to our scout, the prize of the players who are available this year. Bo Bichette, I mentioned that we moved on from Crawford, traded him away, which got an $11 million contract for next year off our books. Looking at Bichette's defensive ratings, he's a little better than Crawford. Looking at his offensive ratings and, more importantly, what he's actually done at the major league level, he is a better offensive player than Crawford. And he also does give us, if we're able to get him signed, another right-handed bat, given that we struggled against left-handed pitching last year. So I think there's a lot of reasons for us to pursue him and for him to be a helpful player to us. I don't love what he's looking for. We've already tried one negotiation with him offline. I offered him 6 years with team options, the final 2 seasons, and an average of $22.5 million. He wanted 8 years with a player option to start, and he's still insistent on that. In a perfect world, and if I was doing a long-term sim with these Mariners, I'd probably be a little more, I will call it detail-oriented. Some of you may call it anal, persnickety, nerdy with the contract negotiation with Bichette. But given that I'm likely only to play another few seasons with this team, again, dependent on when the next patch and hopefully the game manual come out, I'm a little more willing to perhaps give people an extra year and perhaps give people some options that I wouldn't normally give them if I knew I was going to be playing a franchise for decades. Just kind of speeds things up and makes things simpler. And it's extremely unlikely that I'm going to be playing this sim in the 2031, 32, or 33 seasons anyways. So if the contract ends up being bad, that will be the problem of the imaginary virtual GM who takes over these Seattle Mariners once I'm done with them. So I want to try to be somewhat responsible, just to kind of play the game as straightforward and fairly as possible. But I also want to get him signed. He was looking for 8 years at $26.5 million a year with a player option for the final season. We're coming back with him, back at him with 7 years at $24.5 million. Does have a player option for the 6th season, so he can still get out. But then we would have a team option if he opts in for the 7th and final year of the contract. A little bit front-loaded because we've got some money right now, and then the 2 big years are the final year with the player option and the team option. As I said, the average annual value, less than $2 million off what he's looking for. So I think it's going to probably be more an issue of how badly he wants the 8 years and how objectionable he thinks that team option is to him. As I mentioned, I already tried another contract with him at 6 years. If he comes back and is pretty insistent, he wants 8 years and a player option for the final season. At that point, since I do want to bring him on board, I think it just comes down to fighting about the money. Yeah, he says he thinks we're getting close, and you can tell by his face that's getting less and less smiley. He kind of wants what he wants at this point. He has come down to 25.5 million, still insistent on 8 years with a player option at the end. So I'm probably going to try to come pretty close to the money he wants now, but just adjust it a little bit to make it a little more palatable for these next few years when I'll be running the team. So we're basically there. He wanted 8 years at $25.5 million a year. We're offering him 8 years at $25 million a year. We've just changed the structure a bit. And honestly, I'm going to just give him exactly the money that he was looking for. $25.5 million a year. It's structured so it's a bit front-loaded, which we prefer. The only complaint he could have is just the structure of the contract, and actually we're giving him $26 million in the first year instead of a little under $20 million. So I don't think there's any reason for that to be too objectionable to him. We'll go ahead and we'll ask for his response, and he's willing to think about this one. So we have an offer, 8 years, $204 million out to Bo Bichette. If we add him, I think it would be a huge add for us. As I said, a upgrade both offensively and defensively to what we had with Crawford. Very expensive, but I think the fact that the Mariners fortunately signed J-Rod to that very attractively priced contract puts us in a decent position as a middle market team where we've been able to add some talent this previous offseason and hopefully this offseason, and we're still not in a horrible position contract-wise. We do have some important players who are arbitration eligible that are getting more and more expensive that we're going to have to make some decisions on. We'll probably need to be moving on from Cal Raleigh after this year, but fortunately we've got the young catcher Harry Ford coming up, but Raleigh set to make about $15 million next year, particularly if we do end up adding Bichette. I think that's going to be a number that's going to be pretty hard for us to handle. But as I noted, with Ford on board, probably not the end of the world. And moving forward today, since we're just at the start of the free agent period, not surprisingly that neither Bichette nor Hunter Renfroe, nor any of the players that we've offered minor league contracts to hopefully bolster our AA and AAA talent and give us a little bit of an insurance policy against injuries. None of those players have gotten back to us yet, which is not shocking. We have heard back about the potential trade that I mentioned, and I think we can get it done. We would be bringing on MJ Melendez from the Kansas City Royals, who is getting near the end of his team control period in his first arbitration year this year at $3.6 million, expected to make $5.5 million next year. He's been only a league average and honestly slightly under league average offensive player over the first 4 years of his career, largely driven by a .224 career batting average and a ton of strikeouts. But he is a guy with that left-handed bat, and the fact that he's got a pretty interesting profile against right-handed pitching could potentially pair nicely with Hunter Renfroe in a corner outfield spot for us. And Melendez also does have the option to be a catcher, so he could also give us a little bit of an insurance policy next year and really kind of end up in a platoon situation at catcher with Harry Ford in the 2027 season if we do end up moving on from Cal Raleigh, which I think numbers are going to force us to. And the other reason I like Melendez is that he's a captain personality, and that is something that we don't have on the team right now. There are some captain personalities available in free agency, but they're generally players that are well past their prime and really don't deserve a spot in our lineup. So the ability to bring on a captain who's not even 27 years old yet, still has a couple years of team control, competent defensive outfielder who can also play catcher, and I think it's very conceivable looking at his batting profile to think that he could certainly be a bit above average as an offensive player against right-handed pitching. So I think potentially pairing him with Renfroe in one of our corner outfield spots isn't a horrible and cost-effective solution as opposed to spending $15 million on a player who can play every day. There's not necessarily someone available that I think would be better than the combination of Melendez and Renfroe, and I think it's a pretty economical option as I outlined. So the trade isn't totally cheap for us. We have to give up Kevin Biggio and Mike Soroka. These are both guys that we signed to minor league contracts. They were organizational depth for us. Certainly useful players, and they certainly, if we had an injury or two, could be in the mix to make the 26-man roster coming out of spring training. But I think it's fair to say that they're kind of replacement level guys at this point, so I don't mind giving them up. I also have to give up Harold Melendez, a left-handed reliever, not really a big-time prospect. He actually could be a starter. I just don't think he's ever going to be a big-time starter. But we do have to give up the minor league third baseman, Colt Emerson. He's kind of the cornerstone of the deal. Looks like he could be a decent defensive player and a decent offensive player at third base, a left-handed bat. Did not do much splitting this past year between rookie ball and A ball, but he turned 20 years old in the middle of the season. He's still relatively young. I don't love giving him up, but again, we've still got a couple years of control of Melendez, and we're kind of in win-now mode just with the way I'm investing in this team, and also the fact that, as I noted, I'm not going to be playing it for many, many years. So we have to add in one more player to get the deal done. But I think I'm going to do that. I think, as I said, pairing Melendez and Renfroe in a corner outfield spot, bringing a captain personality on board, should help our offense when all is said and done. So we've gone ahead and made that deal. The fans excited that Melendez is around. The players appreciate having a nice captain in the locker room. So those are both positive developments. Small bump in fan interest, but better than nothing. And still have money to spend even with the offers outstanding to Renfroe and Bichette. But we have to just kind of free up that money, moved our scouting and development budgets way below where we'd like to have them. So a lot of that money is really going to hopefully be going back into scouting and player development, so we don't actually have as much financial flexibility to add significant pieces on top of Renfroe and Bichette. So I think over the near term, although there are some interesting pitchers out there, I'm going to try to get those two position players signed over the next several weeks, and then kind of regroup from there and see if maybe there's a pitcher or two on the market who could help us, whose prices have come down. And then I still think it's very conceivable that we might be able to find an arm who could help us in the Rule 5 draft as well. And we have signed our new manager, Jeff Staubach, so that should help us also going forward. Feeling good about that. Got an offer of Sandy Alcantara for Cal Raleigh. That's interesting to know. Certainly be a nice addition to our team. Raleigh's been a pretty important offensive player for us the last couple of years. And with Castillo, Kirby, Gilbert, McCullers Jr., and Wu, I like our pitching staff. As we talked about, it was the best pitching staff in the American League. I think if we got an offer like this a year from now, when we're likely to be looking to move on from Raleigh after one more season, it could be much more interesting to me. But Raleigh is a good defensive catcher who's been well above average offensively each of the 2 seasons that we've played. Not making crazy money. Switch hitter. Alcantara is very interesting. And I do like Harry Ford. But right now we've also made offers to a few pretty good defensive catchers who could potentially be our backups to Raleigh next year, because Ford is a pretty talented defensive player who can play just about anywhere on the field. So I am potentially envisioning him possibly being a first baseman primarily for us next year, which would be an upgrade over the pretty brutal performance we got from the corpse of Paul Goldschmidt at first base this past season. So although I envision Ford as our long-term answer at catcher, I've kind of got him penciled in at first base for this upcoming season. And because he's so cheap, that's one of the reasons that lets us go after Bichette. If I were to trade away Raleigh for Alcantara, we'd be able to fit that because Raleigh's making about $10 million. And Alcantara 17 this year, so another $7 million out of the budget. But then Ford becomes our starting catcher, and we probably need to track down a first baseman in free agency. Now, there's always options at first base. Probably only need to spend a few $1 million and we can get someone acceptable. But it's probably not going to be an offensive combination of a cheap first baseman and Ford that's going to be as productive as Raleigh and Ford would have been. And it's really going to cut into what we can do in scouting and player development. So I think I'm going to pass on it, but it's definitely a tempting offer. If any of you who are watching have thoughts on what you would have done, always helpful for me to get that feedback in the comment section. But we're going to keep moving forward. We're on to Cincinnati. And I've simmed ahead a couple more days. Still have not heard anything from either Bichette or Renfroe, so waiting to hear what they think about our initial offers. I did mention there were a couple of pitchers I was intrigued about that both Jackhammer Possessor and Darkosis were willing to give me some opinions on. One of them was Aaron Savale, who I think at less than $10 million is a pretty interesting option. We've got the money to sign him, but he is on the wrong side of 30, and he's been a below-average pitcher the last couple of seasons in terms of his ERA plus and his FIP minus. Given that I do want to maintain decent investments in scouting and player development, I don't think we do anything with him yet. But the other pitcher that I was talking about in the previous episode is AJ Puck, who we just got an updated scouting report on. He's almost 31. He's fragile physically, but he is a lefty with just devastating stuff. Not looking for a ton of money, and he is really tough on left-handed batters. Kind of vision him as just a lefty specialist out of the pen. If we can get him for less money than the $1.8 million a year he's looking for, and maybe get a contract with a team option or two in it, I think it's a deal worth making that will strengthen our bullpen for a relatively economical number. And there is, potentially with the fact he has a 3-pitch arsenal and 35 stamina, there's a chance he could be used as a starter in a pinch. Honestly, I really like our rotation, so I'm envisioning him as a reliever for us, a lefty specialist type for us. But he does potentially give us a little bit of an optionality as a potential 4 to 5 inning starter if we needed. And he's actually only looking for a minor league contract that becomes guaranteed if promoted. So I think if I offer him a 3-year deal with some team options for less money, he might go for it. I may be pushing things a little too much here. We're offering him an average of $1.4 million a year for 3 years, but the final 2 seasons are both team options, so a pretty team-friendly contract. Yeah. He wants more money. He's willing to come back down to a major league. Well, I guess he's not a minor league contract with major league options anymore. He just wants a major league contract. I might try to give him a little more money, but still keep the conditions the way that I want them. See what he thinks. And we're increasing the average from 3 years at 1.4 to 3 years at an average of 1.5, which is a little more than he was looking for. I don't think he's going to love the terms and conditions of this, He's not interested in continuing discussion. So I don't know how robust a market there's going to be for him. I think it's very conceivable that he'll come back to us hat in hand a few months from now, possibly even just a few weeks from now if there's not a big market that develops for pucks. So if we get him at our price, I'd like to have him on board, but I don't feel like the success of the off season is going to ultimately be dependent on whether we get AJ Puck or not. And you may remember from the start of the offseason that we put two of our prominent players into shorter programs. We use the rest of our development lab slots for long-term programs. But Juan Soto has improved his defense in left field for us, so that is positive. Now we can probably put him through some of the shorter camps focused on his base running and or his bunting. And Cole Young had some outstanding success on his work at second base, so that's great to see. Going to make him an even more productive potential player for us. So we'll similarly do with him what we were going to do with Soto, and have him working on his speed, which is definitely more of a weapon than Soto's over the next few weeks. But good to see some initial success in terms of our player development. And as I noted, we can now go to those final two spots in the lab. I think right now we're going to go right back to Young and Soto. But after this next round of lab work for both of them, it's conceivable that maybe we devote the final 4 to 5 week session that we'll have available to somebody new. And who knows, we might have a Bo Bichette or a Hunter Renfroe on board to get some attention by the time we're resetting things again. Taking a look at the other programs that we're working on, J-Rod, Cam Caminiti, and Andres Munoz, all frustrated with what they're working on, but Harry Ford and George Kirby on track, and Gregory Santos is excelling in terms of improving his control. Would be great to have that program ultimately end up successful when we're getting ready for spring training. And as I mentioned, we've set Young and Soto both up. Young to work on his base stealing technique, Soto to work on base running fundamentals more generally. But good to see some defensive improvements from both of those players, since if everything goes well, they'll hopefully both be in our lineups for 150-plus games this upcoming season. And we've simmed ahead to December 8th. The winter meetings have gotten underway. We've gotten tepid positive feedback from both Renfroe and Bichette today. Renfroe says he wants to wait another few days and evaluate things, and Bichette says he thinks he could accept it, but he also wants to take a few days too. So we'll see what happens in the next few days as we get through the winter meetings and close in on the Rule 5 draft. Would love if we could have contracts with both of these players locked up. But you can see with Bichette in particular, looks like the White Sox, the Giants, and the Marlins, and possibly others are also circling around him. And we have landed the big one. Bo Bichette signed today. Have to pay a third-round supplemental pick as compensation. We'll lose for signing him, but the fans pleased with that. Bichette on board. He will immediately become our shortstop, so it's going to be a very new-look infield next year with the rookie Young at second base, Bichette at short, and likely the rookie Ford primarily playing first base. The only holdover is going to be Gleyber Torres at third base, but I think that should be a much more productive offensive infield than we had a year ago. And I think it's also probably a better defensive infield when all is said and done. So we've landed the big one once again this offseason. Hopefully he'll be more productive in his first year in Seattle than either Soto or Gleyber Torres were this past season. And we've made it to the Rule 5 draft by virtue of our very mediocre season. We are picking right in the middle of the Rule 5 this year, about 2,500 eligible players. We're probably going to be losing some veterans. There's a fair amount of players that are decent guys that we've signed to minor league contracts who were primarily in AA, but even one or two slashed, or primarily in AAA, but even one or two slashed in AA that we may lose here. Just organizational depth. They're kind of similar to the guys like Biggio and I can't even remember at this point the pitcher that we included in the deal to bring Melendez on board, but guys who could certainly help us out, but are borderline roster players at this point, so we're not going to bother protecting any of them. Auto drafting into our pick, and you can see the type of guys that we lost. Matthew Boyd and Jake Rogers were two of the guys that I was thinking of, and not surprisingly, they are no longer part of our organization. And the Rule 5 draft this year is not all that interesting. Honestly, some of the more interesting players out there, Nick Ahmed, John Birdie, and Rodolfo Duran that we can see on this screen, are guys who are currently in our organization who meet those criteria I outlined earlier, similar to Boyd, where they're guys that I didn't want to put on the major league roster, but I hope some of them end up making it through the draft. Scouting director doesn't recommend that we do anything. There is a player I'm marginally intrigued by, 23-year-old first baseman William Lugo from the Mets system. Right-handed hitter, looks like he could be a useful bat against left-handed pitching. Looks like he's a competent defensive first baseman, can play a few other positions not so well. Did combine last year for 30 home runs between high A, double A, and triple A. I don't think he makes our 26-man roster unless we have some injuries, but willing to bring him into camp. So we're going to go ahead and draft Mr. Lugo here. Auto draft until our next pick, and we lost Nick Ahmed and Rodolfo Duran. So a couple of the guys that I had mentioned who were some organizational depth that we picked up as minor league free agents. Thought we might get rated a bit this year. Don't really envision roles for any of those guys unless we were to have some injuries, so I didn't want to put them on the 40-man and guarantee them a major league salary until we kind of get further through the offseason. So there was a risk that we would lose several players, and it appears to be coming to fruition. And we are going to pick a pitcher, as we often do, just to give us a little more depth in camp. Alec Jacob, right-handed pitcher, 27 years old, has spent about half a year in the majors. Back in 2023 was his most recent stint in the majors with the Padres. Split last year between AA and AAA, was pretty productive at both levels. But actually, he wasn't productive at AA in a very small sample size, but he was above average at AAA. I don't think he makes the team unless we have some injuries, but gives us a little more depth for spring training and another decision to potentially make in a few months. And fortunately, we didn't lose any other players. There were only 5 players picked in the 3rd and 4th rounds after we finished up with our selection of Jacob. So lost some organizational depth, but it was all players that we were willing to lose. Unfortunately, we lost 4 of the 6 or 7 guys who kind of met the criteria that they might be plucked from our system. But I'm not going to complain. We've already added MJ Melendez and Bo Bichette in the early stages of this offseason, and I'm still hopeful that we might add Hunter Renfroe into the mix in the next week or so. And we've gotten Hunter Renfroe signed. It was honestly the type of contract that we were trying to get Puck to sign that he was not willing to. A little more money for Renfroe, but we got team options for his age 35 and age 36 seasons. And as I talked about, I think with how proficient he can potentially be against left-handed pitching and how proficient we think Melendez can be against right-handed pitching, feel like we've built ourselves a pretty cost-effective platoon outfielder through the trade and the signing of Renfroe. And as we know, we've added Bichette. Part of the reason I didn't really care about protecting some of those players is that we've added some interesting players to minor league contracts. Casey Mize, Kyle Farmer, Christian Arroyo, Austin Meadows, and then Sal Perez and Jose Trevino, two kind of different catcher options there. Trevino gives us the exceptional defense if we wanted to go that route. Perez, not quite as good defensively, but would give us another captain personality on the team, and could, I think, still be a decent bat against left-handed pitching, so we could potentially platoon one of those guys with Raleigh, and that would give us the opportunity to move forward to first base, as we've been talking about. So we lost some talent in the Rule 5, but we've added some depth. Most of it's going to end up in AAA as organizational depth if we have some injuries, but it is conceivable that either Sal Perez or Jose Trevino ends up being our backup catcher behind Raleigh, which will allow us to make that pivot of forward to first base that I talked about earlier. And with that, we're going to call it an episode. Bichette, Melendez, and Renfroe all signed. So we've filled a corner outfield spot with two guys, and we filled a starting shortstop spot this offseason. Still have money available, but again, scouting and development aren't where we want them to be. So we'll likely look to invest more there. But now it's time where we could certainly pivot to what's available on the pitching market. Take a just quick look at the batters available, and if I could pull up the screen that I want to, that would probably be more helpful. Edman, Gallo, and Jimenez, three of the better players available, but also more expensive. Part of the reason why I kind of like what we did with Melendez and Renfroe is that it's, I think someone combining those two, we're going to probably get better offense than we would get from either Gallo or Jimenez. Those two certainly have more power than Melendez or Renfroe, but I think they're not as good defensively. Maybe Gallo is, but as a Yankees fan, Gallo will never be on one of my teams again. And he certainly struggles to make contact, as you can see by him remaining on the interstate for these last couple seasons, and over 200 strikeouts each year as well. So I kind of like what we did, but not a lot else that we need to do, with the fact that we also brought those catchers on board, and we also brought the Rule 5 first baseman on board. I think we've got more than 13 major league quality players to be position players for us. So it's just a matter of whether we maybe want to use a little bit of that money that we have available to chase a pitcher. And taking a look at the top names that are still on the market, Savale is still out there looking for a little bit less money now. That may be something to explore. We've gotten one scouting report back on Matsuura, the import, the international free agent, but still only average scouting accuracy. But he looks like a potentially incredible left-handed arm for the bullpen. Just don't know that I ultimately want to be spending $14 million on him, and it doesn't seem like anyone else wants to at this point either, since he's still on the market. But I'm going to have to give some thought to Savale. That would let us move Wu into the bullpen as a long or middle reliever, and then have a rotation of Castillo, Kirby, Gilbert, McCullers Jr., and Savale. we don't need help in the pitching staff, but we're clearly a win now team. Maybe Savale is someone that we think about more seriously in the next episode. And then we'll also just check in on our friend here, Mr. Puck, and he is still available. So there are some interesting options ahead of us. If you've got thoughts on what we should or should not do, please share them in the comment section. As I noted, you won't be hearing from me again until Saturday with a new episode, but hopefully I'll have one for you at some point on Saturday. And until then, I'm going to enjoy some steak and barbecue, and unfortunately also a lot of hard work in Texas. And until the next time we're together, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.